Morning, guys. This is going to be continuing on population and migration patterns and processes. Today is April the 8th, meaning we have 22 more instructional days until the AP exam. So again, your due now for today is going to be grab yourself a pen, paper, or even better, open up a Microsoft Word document so you can go ahead and take notes. Pause it, come back when you're ready. So the goal for today is to be able to explain the transitional stages of the demographic transition model by dissecting the DTM and analyzing the different characteristics visible in each level. So we're going to start off by looping back to the population pyramids that we were covering in the last video. So demographers could also use the population pyramid to look at dependency ratio. This is helpful when analyzing the workforce and age distribution in a country. Individuals aged 15 to 64 are considered to be independent because they can take care of themselves by working. So that would be this population right here, the working population. So many of you guys already do fall into this working population. Individuals below or above these age groups, being the young dependents and the elderly dependents, are considered to be dependents as they depend on others for their survival. Before the age of 15, you really can't work or do much for yourself, especially in other less developed countries, newly industrialized countries. You would be dependent on your parents, being the working population. When you're elderly, you can't work anymore either. So that's especially more true the further you go up in this population pyramid. So you again become dependent, whether it be on your children or the government, being put in a nursing home, living with your family, you'd become an elderly dependent. So with a high dependency ratio, a nation can be strained as independents work to provide and support for the dependents. So if a country were to have had a lot of children in, let's say, the 50s, and these people in the 50s who were born in the 50s end up having so we would have a very large base, right? There was a lot of people born in the 50s. Then they age and they don't have too many kids. So instead of seeing a pyramid shape, we would see more of, as they age, the people who were born in the 50s would move up into this sector of the population pyramid, the working population. We're not having many kids. We'd have a very large, round center. And then we'd have a very narrow base. So then what happens as we move into the next generation? Now those people born in the 50s are over here in the elderly dependents. And they're going to have a large representation out here. And they're going to have a smaller representation in the working population. So now the majority of the working population can't really worry about having kids because they'd have more dependents down here, and then they have a lot of dependents over here, and then we have a very small center. That would be a very bad case because then most of the efforts of the working population would be spent on taking care of the elderly and the young dependents. So we're going to move into the demographic transition model. I'm sure you guys remember this one. You drew it out on your pieces of paper. You actually drew exactly this. You wrote out all of these examples here. Unfortunately, however, that was left in class in your binders. So what I want you to do is maybe just take a picture of this DTM chart with your cell phone. Take a picture, make sure you get the LDC, NIC, and MDC area in the top, and then we'll get into it. So demographic transition model stage 1. That would be this column right here. Low growth. So yes, we have low growth, but this is going to be characterized by high crude birth rate and high crude death rate. So although there are lots of people being born, they have a high crude death rate. That would be because they, at this point, still haven't developed much sanitation. They haven't developed much they haven't developed much, and their life expectancy isn't that high. So lots of people are born, but a lot of people are dying. Their medical practices aren't that great. Rate of natural increase is stable, or has a slow increase, because their crude death rate and their crude birth rate are more or less even. There might be a few more births than deaths. That's why we would say it could have a slow increase. So lots of people are being born, but a lot of people are dying. Notice that crude death rate runs right below the crude birth rate. Normally countries with subsistence farming without an industrialized economy. Most of these people farm for themselves. Remember, subsistence farming? This was something that we covered in the agricultural unit. This means that you're farming for yourself or your family. You don't make much else to trade. Again, there are no whole countries that are in stage 1. So again, we'll look at it right here. High death rate, very high birth rate, but they're almost even. That's why we see little to no increase there in their rate of natural increase. Their total population, you start to see a slight increase. A few remote groups would be examples. High birth rate, they're characterized by high birth rate, they're characterized by high death rate. Rate of natural increase is stable or slow. Reasons for changes for birth rate. Many children are needed for farming. Many children died at an early age. Another reason would be religious or social encouragement, and they have no family planning in this stage. Reasons for changes at death rate. Disease. Lots of disease. Famine. Lots of famine. Poor medical knowledge. So many children die. Moving to stage 2. Demographic transition model stage 2. So there's a very high growth. You still have a very high crude birth rate. Most families still live on farms, so they still need lots of children to help them out in these farms. Notice that this bar right here, reasons for changes in birth rate, it expands over here into stage 2, because it's the same reason. They need many children so they can help them out on the farms. But notice that we see right here, the total population line, this red line, starts to increase dramatically compared to stage 1. And that would be because they have improving medical care. They have improving infrastructure, like water supply and sanitation, so fewer children die. So life expectancy increases. Birth rate stays high. Medical care improves, so that, as you see, makes the death rate dramatically drop. Notice that the death rate was really high, almost even with crude birth rate in stage 1. Here in stage 2, the crude death rate drops a ton. So, high crude birth rate, most families still live on farms. Women do not have access to education regarding contraception. So that's one reasoning behind why the crude birth rate is still high in both stage 1 and stage 2. Very high crude birth rate. Rapidly declining crude death rate. Death rates begin to decline due to improved technology and healthcare system. Better supply of clean water, fewer children are dying. The rate of natural increase is rapidly increasing. It occurs because fewer people are dying with similar numbers are being born. What I'm saying there is similar numbers of people being born to stage 1. Lots of people being born. But see, the difference is less people are dying. Example countries are Egypt, Kenya, and Bangladesh. Least developed countries. These are also known as LDCs. As you can see right here, stage 1 and stage 2 qualify as less developed countries. And these would both be in the periphery. So you can call it stage 1, you can call it stage 2, you can call it a less developed country, or you can call it a periphery country. Any of these. Moving into stage 3. That would be this bar right here. Notice that the crude birth rate starts to take a dip. And the crude death rate drops a bit more, less dramatically than it did here in stage 2, but it does still continue to drop. And we see this population increase. Why is that? So we have a declining crude birth rate. Families are beginning to have fewer children. because they realize the changes in society and the impact in the number of children they have. Families now have to move to cities for jobs, and they decide to have fewer children because of the increase in cost of living in cities. Remember, we said that they need a lot of children here in stage 1 and stage 2. Note this little bar, many children are needed for farming. But then we're starting to industrialize here. Remember, these are countries like Mexico, countries like Brazil, countries like South Africa. So we are industrialized. We are a little bit more developed because we fall under newly industrialized countries. So now people are moving to cities for jobs. Now, if you're living in a city, your land is going to be a lot more expensive. Your food is going to be a lot more expensive. So having a lot of children just isn't a good idea because it's going to be a lot more expensive to raise all of these children. So death rates begin to decline due to improved technology and healthcare system. So again, we start to see an improvement in medical attention. We see an improvement in sanitation. We have a better supply of clean water, even better than stage 2. So if you even again less children are dying. So the rate of natural increase is slowing down. Example countries again would be like Mexico, Brazil, China, South Africa. Newly industrialized countries in stage 3 are also considered semi-periphery countries. So newly industrialized, semi-periphery, stage 3 are all synonymous. They all mean the same thing. Look at it again. Birth rate starts to decline. Birth rate starts to decline because it's becoming expensive to raise children in cities. The crude death rate dips even more, and we still see an increase in the population. We're going to move on to stage 4. Stage 4 demographic transition model. We have low growth. This is where we would be. The United States, Japan, France, the United Kingdom. So we start to see a low growth. We don't really see too many more people being added to our population. We also have a low crude birth rate because now we have family planning. Women are significantly more educated. And women are getting, men and women are both getting married significantly later in life. So this means that people now have a choice, because there's contraception. People have a choice to whether they're going to have a child or not. Women are educated, so women now have a very active and large role in society. And people are getting married later, meaning that there's a smaller window of time that people are going to be having children. Remember the total fertility rate? It was it looked at women between the ages of 15 and 45. So if women are getting married much later, most women get married in their mid late 20s, some in their 30s. You start to see that's a major cut into that little window. You see a whole 10 years that's being cut, 10, 15 years that's being cut out of that little window. So later marriages result in fewer births. So as many of you can attest for healthcare in the United States, it's pretty great. So the healthcare is a lot better than if you were to try to go to India or Egypt for medical attention. We have a reliable food supply. Even in circumstances like that we're going through today. You can go to H-E-B, sure you might have to wait in a line, sure you might not get the exact name brand that you want of a food that you want, but you're going to be able to go to the grocery store and you're going to be able to find food. Worst case scenario, you could even go to a different grocery store and you might even be able to find what it is that you're looking for. You have a McDonald's on every block. So yes, we can definitely say in a more developed country, we do have a very reliable food supply. So rate of natural increase is also low. So seeing as how we don't have a high crude birth rate anymore, not many kids are being born, and we do have a low crude death rate, this would mean that our rate of natural increase is low. So let's look at how that looks over here. This gray line is the birth rate. This black line is the death rate. And note here toward the end, they become almost even. up here in the first half of the stage 4, we do see it is a bit higher than the death rate, which is why we still do have an increase over here. We still do have an increase in population right here. So these societies are more modern, societies with improved technology, and zero population growth. Zero to little. Example countries again would be the United States, France, Australia, United Kingdom, Canada. So stage 4 countries are also synonymous with more developed countries. If it's stage 4, it's also a more developed country. It would also be considered a core country. Now let's move into the last stage, the stage 5. So we have a declining population. Why is the population declining? Why is the population shrinking? So that would be because we have a low crude birth rate. Not many children are being born. We do have a very low crude death rate, but the crude death rate is still a little bit higher than the birth rate. Note that it says very low crude birth rate. So that means like very few babies are being born. But it says low crude death rate. That means that a lot of people are, less people are dying, but more people are dying than people are being born. So if more people are being taken out of a society than being brought in, that would mean that the population, as you can see right here, starts to take a dip. It starts going down. Note that the birth rate dips below the death rate. So rate of natural increase is slowly decreasing. Example countries are Germany and Japan. These are the most developed countries, and these would also qualify for core. So stage 4, stage 5, they're core countries, they're more developed countries. Looking a little bit more into the DTM, through the DTM we can see that the crude death rate is a result of technological innovation. Remember, as we went from stage 4, being, well, there are no example countries, but remember when we were discussing the Sentinel Islands, these people live the same way people would live thousands and thousands of years ago. They walk around with spears on an island, no electricity whatsoever, no contact with the outside world, so no technology. Their crude death rate is very high. So we can see that the crude death rate is a result of technological innovation. As we move forward with technology, say we look at the technology available here in the United States or technology available in Japan, you note that the crude death rate becomes significantly lower. Your life expectancy starts to grow. Again, let me try to finish this sentence. Through the DTM, we can see that the crude death rate is a result of technological innovation and improvement in healthcare, while the crude birth rate is a result of cultural choice and individual decisions, unless restricted or promoted by the government. We'll get into this little section, this little parenthesis section in just a second, but let me touch up on the crude birth rate one more time. Again, crude death rate is a result of technological innovation, but crude birth rate is a result of cultural choice and individual decisions. So, family planning. Family planning comes into play in stage 3, stage 4. They also start noticing that it's going to become very expensive to raise children where people are moving. So this is more of a choice here, the birth rate. Obviously you don't really choose when you want to die, but you choose when you want to have a baby. So cultural choice, crude birth rate, and technological choice, which would be the crude death rate. So countries can still have a growing population even if life expectancy is not very high. This is what we call demographic momentum, or hidden momentum. This occurs when younger generations have large numbers of children, which far outnumbers the elderly population. The crude birth rate far outnumbers the crude death rate, creating a large base in the country's population pyramid. So now we're going to look into population policies, which is what I was talking about here, unless restricted or promoted by the government. So as societies try to improve, governments and leaderships may try to control the growth of their population, whether it be to increase the population. Say you're in a stage 5 and you start to see a population decline. The government may say, well, we're losing a lot of people, we should probably do something about increasing the population. This is when we saw that commercial, remember the Do It for Denmark campaign? That was what we call a pro-natalist campaign. So pro-natalism, pro meaning for. So pro-natalist policies are developed when countries encourage reproduction and larger families. This typically only occurs in graying populations, stage 5 DTM, and is achieved by economically incentivizing citizens by giving them free childcare or stipends of money per child. Remember when we were looking at the Do It for Denmark campaign, they would say that they would give the families X amount of money per child that they would have. They would also guarantee that there would be childcare services provided for them. So they're mostly in stage 5. The reason that they're not having babies is because both men and women are very, very involved in their jobs. It's also very difficult to raise children because they're very involved in their jobs, and it is very expensive to raise a child. So that's why governments come in and they say, okay, well, the problems would be that they're expensive and they're working. So what can we do? The government comes in and they says, okay, well, we're going to go ahead and provide the families with newborns with childcare services. We'll go ahead and give it to them, and we'll go ahead and give them extra money. So this incentivizes these people to have babies. Pronatalist policies are meant at increasing the population. Then we have antinatalist policies. This is going to be seen in stage 3 countries. The most famous example would be China. So we'll read into this really quickly. Antinatalist population policies encourage a reduction in the fertility rate of families in a country. This is typically done in stage 2 and stage 3 as governmental control is more effective. China is famous for decades for carrying out the single-child policy. China in the mid-1900s noted, well, we have an enormous population and it's just growing exponentially. We need to do something about this to control it. So they go ahead and put in a single-child policy. You can only have one child. And remember what we said about the rate of natural increase when it takes 2 people to have a baby. If they only have one baby, then the rate of natural increase is going to be 1. So these 2 parents die, they leave behind that one child. So 2 people leave the society when they die, and they only brought in 1 society. So we start to see a decreasing population. And that is why we have the single child policy. That way we can slowly decrease the population. This is just a little chart that sums up everything that we just discussed. If you'd like to, you can pause this just so you can review the information. This is nothing that we haven't covered either before or in this video. Your exit ticket would be due tonight at 11:59 p.m. You are to look at this picture right here, this image, and you are to answer these 3 questions on it. Aside from that exit ticket, you are also to read Chapter 4. You already have access to it. It was attached to the Chapter 3 readings. I put both Chapter 3 and Chapter 4 in the same PDF, so just open up the same file that you had been reading these past 2 days. You should have been done with Chapter 3 by last night. If you're not, then I suggest that you speed through Chapter 3. It wasn't that long. And Chapter 4 is just as long, which again is not that long. Again, they're in the same file. If you already have that file, then just go ahead and continue reading through it. If you have any questions, go ahead and email me.